Hi class. In this video we're going to review a problem that's similar to P10-22 in your homework. So in this problem we have a blood bank. They are a private charity supported by government grants. They had a really busy month due to a powerful hurricane that hit some neighboring islands, and they had a lot of residents that donated blood. So we're looking at increased costs. Obviously, partly because they collected more blood, they did more work. So it says the blood bank collected and processed over 20% more blood than had originally been planned for the month. And so somebody in the blood bank actually prepared a report. So they are comparing our actual results to our planning budget, and they calculated some variances by comparing those two budgets. Then it says the managing director of the blood bank was very unhappy with the report because obviously you see some unfavorable variances. And of course, if you're looking at your planning budget numbers for expenses and your actual results, you would expect your actual results for your expenses to be higher because you did more work. So that kind of casts a false light on the situation. So the managing director pointed out the additional costs have been fully covered by payments. The government official who prepared the report countered that all the figures have been submitted by the blood bank to the government. He was just pointing out the actual costs were a lot higher than promised in the budget. So we have another chart that has some amounts or some formulas that were used to construct the planning budget. So it looks like we have some mixed or some variable cost, a couple of or three fixed costs, and then the administration is a mixed cost. The little Q has to do with how it relates to the cost driver, and the cost driver in this case is the number of liters of blood that was collected. So that would be the Q. So our first task is to prepare a new performance report using the flexible budget approach. So instead of comparing our actual results to our planning budget as they did in the report and the instructions, we're going to do some comparisons using the flexible budget. All right, so we're going to start with the liters of blood collected, and that is given to us in the problem. Looks like 880 actual liters of blood collected, 700 were in the planning budget. So let's put those two in. And then remember, the flexible budget is the version of the budget that matches the number of cost drivers in the actual results. So we're looking for a flexible budget that has the same number of liters of blood collected as a cost driver as the actual results. So this should be the same. Whoops. Got carried away with my 8s there. 880 liters. So this flexible budget, liters collected and actual results are equal. So then we're going to fill in our actual results column, and that should be fairly easy because that was given to us in the instructions. So let's see. They are up here. So I'm just going to type each of those in. And I cheated and printed off the instructions so I can actually see them without so much scrolling. So that may be something would be helpful to you, or just kind of look at the book while you're doing it. I have an ebook, which sometimes is nice, but in the scrolling case, it can be aggravating. All right, so we have total expenses for our actual results of $40,008. I'm going to hop all the way over here to the planning budget because mostly I like to do things that I know fairly easily first. And since the planning budget amounts given in instructions, we can just plug those in. So we actually have all these amounts here, and they're going to come straight down over here under the planning budget. So let me type those in real quick. All right, so our planning budget bottom total expenses was $35,295. And now we have to actually do some work. So we are in the flexible budget column, and we're going to have to calculate our expenses based on the flexible budget cost driver, which is the 880 liters of blood collected. So to do that, we need this second chart that tells us the cost formula. So medical supplies is $11.50 times the number of liters collected. So to do that, I'm going to do $11.50 and multiply that by the 880 liters. Gives me $10,120. Lab test, $14.35 times 880 liters. Equipment depreciation is fixed, so that one's easy. We can just bring that down. Rent, $1,500. That one was given. Utilities, that one was fixed also, so $280. And administration is a mixed cost, so it's going to be the $13,100 plus $1.60 times 880 liters. Which gives us $14,508. All right, so now that we have those amounts in our flexible budget, our planning budget, and our actual results, then we can start comparing our amounts. So we're going to do our spending variance first. So note that flexible budget and actual results, we're comparing some amounts that are based on the same liters of blood collected. So if there's variance in these amounts, it's not going to be due to the amount of work they did or the amount of liters of blood they collected. It's due to the amount of costs for each of these things. So let's do our actual results less our flexible spending. And again, I told you in the last video, I don't really care if you have some positives and negatives here. You can put them all negative, all positive, and it will be the opposite. I used mine actual results less the flexible budget. If you did flexible budget less the actual results, obviously the negatives will be in a different spot. So I really don't pay a whole lot of attention to the positives and negatives. I like to look down through them and interpret them one at a time, because that way you really understand how to interpret them. So when we're trying to figure out if these are unfavorable or favorable, or if there's no variance, we're going to look at our actual results compared to our flexible budget. And these are expenses, so we want our actual expenses to be less than what we budgeted, because that's a good thing. That means our costs came in lower than what we anticipated. So if we look at medical supplies, our actual results were $10,200. Our flexible budget was $10,120. So our actual expenses were higher than what we budgeted. So higher expenses equals lower net income. So this is unfavorable because it would lower our income, or our net operating income. Lab test was exactly the opposite. We came in with about $12,200, and we budgeted $12,600. So we actually came in below budget. And for an expense, that is a favorable thing. Equipment depreciation is a fixed cost, so we should have expected that to be the same with no change, but for whatever reason, we actually spent $210 more than what we had budgeted, so that is unfavorable. Rent is none, because there was no variance. Our utilities were a bit higher in our actual results than they were in the flexible budget. So we can say that is an unfavorable variance. And our administration looks like it was a little bit lower in our actual results than in our flexible budget, so that is favorable. And let's do our total expenses. Our total expenses had a $228 variance. It looks like our actual expenses were less than our flexible expenses, so that one is favorable also. Okay, so now we're going to go to the other side of our chart, and we're going to do our activity variances. So I'm going to take my flexible budget, subtract out my planning budget, and again, you can do it the other way if you want to. Do your planning budget less the flexible budget, because I'm really looking for the way you interpret it, whether it's unfavorable, favorable, or none. There aren't any negatives in this one, so they're all going to be one or the other except for these three, and let's go ahead and type those in that are no variances. So our medical supplies is an expense, and it looks like in our flexible budget we had $10,120. We only planned for $8,050, so that is an unfavorable variance. And I just want to point out that when we're looking at these variances are related to the activity, or in this case, the number of liters of blood collected. So we planned to collect 700 liters. We actually had a flexible budget that was equal to what we really collected, so that was 880 liters. So these variances here are related to the activity rather than the cost of each medical supply or each lab test or anything else like that. So these variances are related to the activity. So we can expect our expenses to be higher because we had more activity. So it would stand to reason that all of these, except for the ones that are fixed, completely fixed, should be unfavorable. So in the second case, this is lab test. We spent about $12,600 on lab tests. We only budgeted $10,000, so we actually were over that budget, so that one's unfavorable. And the same for administration. We actually have a flexible budget that's higher than our planning budget, so for expenses, that's unfavorable. And again, activity variances, we expect there to be some unfavorable variances because we had more activity going on, which means we had more expenses. So let's do this last one. So our flexible budget expenses were over $40,000, and our planning budget were just over $35,000. So all of our expenses in aggregate were more, which again makes sense because we did more work. So that is an unfavorable variance. All right, so that is our chart. And we have a second part of the question that says, do you think any of the variances above should be investigated and why? So we have an unfavorable activity variance and a favorable spending variance. So the unfavorable activity variances, as I already said, was due to the fact that we did, 20% more blood collection than we anticipated. So we should expect this activity variance to be unfavorable because we did more work, we had to spend more money. So as far as the right-hand side of this chart, I would say, no, I wouldn't really worry about any of this because probably all of this can be explained by the increase in activity. We can come over here and look at our spending variances, and our spending variances, it looks like two of them are favorable, and then we've got 1, 2, 3 unfavorable with the overall favorable spending variance. So bottom line is we spent less than we expected to. So that is a good thing. It is interesting that our equipment depreciation changed, so that's probably one we want to look at because typically it won't. It's a fixed cost. So something must have happened to increase that depreciation. So we could have changed methodology. Perhaps we bought new equipment, and if we did buy new equipment, was it something that was necessary? So that's something we would want to look at to just determine whether that was an appropriate expense or not. But probably they purchased a new piece of equipment because they had to do more work. So that would be my guess, but it should be looked at anyway. We have one that's favorable, so lab test and administration both. But lab test was quite a bit, and that's kind of odd. So we might want to look into that one and see why we had a favorable variance on lab tests. Did we get a discount on those lab tests, so we're outsourcing those? Did we find a cheaper supplier? That might be something good to know. Do we have a favorable variance because we neglected to do some tests? So perhaps we cut corners, we have a favorable variance. So that could be a favorable variance because something very positive happened, such as we got a discount or found a cheaper company to outsource our lab tests to, or perhaps we neglected to do some things and we spent less because we didn't do the test we needed to do. So that's a pretty big variance right there compared to the other one, so we might want to look at that. And then administration, we could look at that if we chose to. I don't know, in this problem it doesn't tell us what administration um, includes. So if we spent less on administration, it could be because people were doing more work, and um, maybe we lost had some turnover. Maybe there was some burnout. Maybe somebody was involved in some of the hurricane activity and had to take some leave time to take care of some personal things and didn't get paid leave. So I don't know why administration's less, but that may be something we want to look at. Usually when you're doing variance analysis, a company will have kind of a threshold of things they'll look at. So if this company, I don't know, if their threshold was $200 variance in either direction. So if that was their cutoff, they wouldn't look at anything that's less than $200. So the only things they would look at would be the lab tests, the equipment depreciation, and that looks like it. So if it's a tiny bit variation, so like the $26 in utilities, well, in the grand scheme of things, that probably doesn't make a lot of difference. So you probably wouldn't want to spend a lot of management time investigating something that's not material. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're looking at variances. You're not going to look at every one of them. This company only has, 6 expense items. In a real company, you could have hundreds or thousands. So you're not going to look at all of them. You're going to do the variance analysis and then pick out the ones that kind of catch your eye. So that is all there is to P10-22. I hope this video helps you. As always, if you have questions, feel free to ask.